And then I woke up. I didn't know what had pulled me from sleep at first. The house was silent, the kind of deep, suffocating quiet that only exists in the dead of night. But something felt off. The air in my room was thick, heavy, charged. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs as I turned my head slowly, and saw him standing in my doorway. Nathan. He wasn't moving. He wasn't blinking. He was just standing there, staring at me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask what the hell he was doing. But my throat had closed up, my breath caught somewhere deep in my chest. My body refused to move, as if some primal instinct had taken hold, warning me that any sudden motion might trigger something I wasn't prepared to face. And then, after what felt like an eternity, Nathan turned and walked away. No explanation. No words. Just that same eerie silence as he disappeared into the dark hallway. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Let me start these stories from the beginning. I got the call late at night. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, jarring me awake. I almost ignored it. Unknown numbers usually meant bad news. Bill collectors, scammers, robocalls. But something in my gut told me to answer. Emily? The voice on the other end was hesitant, careful. This is Officer Delgado with the Pine Hollow Police Department. I need you to come to your parents' house as soon as possible. My chest tightened. What's going on? Are they okay? There was a pause. A hesitation just long enough to make my skin prickle. They're fine, he said. But we've found your brother. I sat up so fast the room spun. Nathan. I hadn't heard that name in years. I barely let myself think it anymore. He'd been gone for 20 years. I was 8 years old when it happened. One moment, he was beside me in the backyard, catching fireflies. The next, he was gone. No trace, no clues, no witnesses. Just a wide-open field and the echo of my own voice screaming his name. The police searched for months. Our parents clung to hope long after everyone else had moved on. But eventually, Nathan became a ghost. Just a face in a handful of old photographs, a name we never spoke aloud. Now, out of nowhere, they were telling me he was alive. I barely remembered driving to my parents' house. The whole world blurred past me in a haze. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked the same as it had when I was a kid. The chipped white fence. The blue front door. The same porch light humming weakly in the evening gloom. But inside, something wasn't the same. My mother flung open the door before I could even knock. Emily, she gasped, pulling me into a crushing hug. Her hands trembled against my back. He's here. He's home. I barely heard her. My eyes darted past her, into the living room. And there he was. Nathan. He was taller than I remembered, broad-shouldered and solid. His dark brown hair was a little too long, unkempt. His features were sharper now, his jaw more defined, cheekbones more prominent, but his eyes were the same. Deep green. Piercing. I swallowed hard, trying to process it. He looked like Nathan. But I had no memory of him like this. Because he had never gotten the chance to grow up. Emily, he said softly. His voice was deep but familiar. 100 emotions slammed into me all at once, relief, confusion, fear. This was impossible. It had to be a mistake. I took a shaky step toward him. I can't believe it, I whispered. You're really back. Nathan smiled, just barely. But there was something wrong about it. Something off. It didn't reach his eyes. And then he said, I never left. I tried to talk to my parents about Nathan again, but they wouldn't listen. He's been through something terrible, Mom said, her voice sharp with exhaustion. Of course he's going to seem different. He barely remembers anything. Dad just sighed, rubbing his temples. Emily, please. We just got him back. Can't you just be happy? I wanted to be God. I wanted to believe that this was just my own paranoia, that Nathan was exactly who he claimed to be. But the pieces weren't fitting. I knew my brother. I remembered him. And whoever was standing in our house, he wasn't the same. That night, I pulled out my laptop and started digging through old articles about Nathan's disappearance. The headlines were painful to read: local boy vanishes without a trace. Family holds out hope for missing son. Another year without answers. I skimmed through them, already familiar with most of the details. He had been playing in the backyard. I had run inside to grab something, I couldn't even remember what. When I came back, he was gone. No footprints leading away. No signs of a struggle. Just, missing. But then I found something I had never seen before, another missing child report. Adam Whitmore. My heart started pounding as I read. Adam was 8 years old. He had vanished the exact same night as Nathan. And not just anywhere, from a town only 15 miles away. A cold weight settled in my stomach. I had never heard about this before. Why had my parents never mentioned it? Why had none of the articles about Nathan referenced another missing boy? I searched his name, hoping to find more information, but there was almost nothing. Just one grainy photograph in a digitized newspaper clipping. He was small, thin, dark-haired, with piercing green eyes that seemed to stare right through me. Something about his face felt familiar. I clicked on the image, zooming in, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't know why, but I felt like I had seen him before. I called Rachel the next morning. We met up at a coffee shop, and I told her everything, how Nathan felt wrong, the missing scar, the way he just stood in my doorway that night. And now, this boy, Adam Whitmore, who had disappeared at the exact same time. Rachel didn't speak right away. She just stirred her coffee, staring at the table, her brows furrowed. "Okay," she said slowly. "That is weird. Like, really weird." She looked up at me. "Have you talked to your parents about this Adam kid?" I shook my head. They won't even acknowledge that something's off. They're just so happy to have Nathan back that they refuse to see it. Rachel sighed. "Look, I get it. It's crazy. But, Emily, what are you even suggesting here? That he's not actually your brother?" She hesitated. "That he's someone else?" I swallowed hard, gripping my cup to keep my hands from shaking. "I don't know. I just know that something isn't right." Rachel nodded slowly, processing it. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down, her expression shifting from concern to something closer to fear. "It's your brother," she whispered. My stomach dropped. "Don't answer it." Rachel hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen before she pressed decline. The call ended. Silence stretched between us, thick and uneasy. A few seconds later, her phone vibrated again, a text this time. I leaned over to look. The message was from Nathan's number. Just 2 words. "Come outside." We both turned toward the coffee shop window. The sidewalk outside was empty, except for a figure standing across the street. Nathan. He was staring directly at us. Rachel and I sat frozen, staring through the cafe window. Nathan stood across the street, motionless, watching us. His expression was unreadable, no wave, no smile, not even a blink. Just standing there, as if he had been there the whole time, waiting. My breath felt thick in my throat. My mind screamed at me to do something, but what? When I finally turned back to Rachel, her face had gone pale. "Emily," she whispered, gripping my wrist, "how did he know we were here?" I reached for my phone with shaking hands, scrolling through my messages. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't texted my parents about coming here. As far as Nathan knew, I was supposed to be at work. There was no way he could have known where I was, unless he had followed me. I stole another glance at the window, but he was gone. The sidewalk was empty. No sign of him anywhere. Rachel let out a shaky breath. Okay, that was officially the creepiest thing ever, she muttered, rubbing her temples. I don't like this, Em. Maybe we should go to the cops. I wanted to agree, but what would I even tell them? My brother, who's been missing for 20 years, is acting weird. They'd chalk it up to stress. Just like my parents had. Instead, I drove straight home and locked myself in my childhood bedroom. My hands were still shaking as I dug through old shoeboxes stuffed under my bed, searching for something, anything, that would explain what was happening. I needed proof. A memory. Something to remind me that Nathan had once been real, that this wasn't some trick my mind was playing on me. And that's when I found it, a torn notebook with my own childhood handwriting. The moment I opened it, a wave of dizziness hit me so hard I had to grip the bed frame to steady myself. The pages were filled with crude drawings, the kind an 8-year-old would make, stick figures, trees, a dark house with long, spindly windows. And a single sentence, written over and over again. Don't trust Nathan. If he comes back, run. I slammed the notebook shut, my pulse roaring in my ears. My own writing. My own warning. But I had no memory of writing it. No memory of ever being afraid of Nathan. But something deep inside me knew, I had forgotten something. Something important. My stomach twisted as I flipped back through the notebook, stopping at a drawing of 2 kids holding hands, standing in front of the same abandoned house I had sketched a few pages earlier. A name was scrawled underneath in shaky letters, the game we played. My breath hitched. The house. The game. Somewhere, buried deep in my past, I knew what it meant. And whatever it was, I had spent years trying to forget. That night, my dreams were different. They weren't dreams at all. They were memories. I saw flashes of Nathan and me running through the woods as children, our laughter echoing in the air. A game. I saw a crumbling house, its broken windows yawning like a mouth. And I saw something else, something standing in the doorway, watching us, waiting. Its arms were too long, its body a shifting blur. And it was smiling. I woke up gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat. The game we played. I didn't remember the rules. I didn't remember how it ended. But I did remember this, Nathan and I weren't alone that night. And whatever had been with us in those woods, it never left. The next morning, I woke up exhausted, my head thick with leftover pieces of my dream. No, my memory. The house was real. The game was real. But the worst part? I had forgotten all of it. Somehow, a whole piece of my childhood had been wiped from my mind. And I knew, deep down, that wasn't an accident. My fingers curled around the notebook, its pages still open to my warning, don't trust Nathan. If he comes back, run. My own words stared back at me, mocking me. How could I have forgotten something this important? I needed answers. And I knew exactly where to start. Rachel agreed to come with me, though she didn't look thrilled about it. You realize how insane this is, right? She muttered as we trudged through the woods, pushing past thorny branches. The air felt wrong out here, too still, too heavy, like the trees were holding their breath. You think there's some creepy house that's been sitting out here all these years and no one's noticed? She shook her head, but I saw the unease in her eyes. She was trying to rationalize it, to make it sound stupid, because if it wasn't stupid, then it was real. And if it was real, we were in trouble. We walked for what felt like forever before I saw it. The house. It sat in a small clearing, half sunken into the earth, its wooden frame rotting, sagging inward like broken ribs. The windows were black holes, empty and yawning. My stomach twisted violently, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick. I had been here before. I didn't remember when, or why, but my body did. My hands were ice cold, my legs locked in place. Rachel muttered a curse. Holy shit, Emily. You didn't tell me it would look like something out of a horror movie. I took a step forward, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then I saw it, a small, rusted sign nailed to the front door. I reached out with trembling fingers, brushing dirt away from the faded words. Whitmore Orphanage. Closed 1998. The world tilted. Whitmore. Adam Whitmore. The boy who had gone missing the same night as Nathan. I staggered back, gasping, but before I could say anything, Rachel's voice cut through the silence. Emily. I turned. She was standing near the edge of the clearing, staring at something in the dirt. My stomach clenched as I walked toward her. There, half buried in the soil, was something small and yellowed with age. A child's shoe. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the tiny, mud-streaked shoe half buried in the dirt. It was old, too old. The leather was cracked, the laces frayed, but I recognized it. I knew this shoe. I didn't know how, or why, but something inside me screamed that I had seen it before. My throat tightened as I turned to Rachel, who looked just as shaken. Emily, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, what the hell is this place? I didn't answer. Because I knew. I knew without knowing. I swallowed hard, turning back to the orphanage. The rotting sign, the hollow windows, the oppressive silence pressing against my skull like a weight. This place, it had taken something from me. It had erased something from my mind. And Nathan. Nathan had come back, but he wasn't alone. I forced myself to step inside, my legs trembling as I crossed the threshold. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying the sour scent of rotting wood and something deeper, something wrong. My fingers traced the walls as I moved forward, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The house was too familiar. My feet knew where to go before my mind did, leading me through peeling wallpaper, past empty doorways, deeper into the dark. Then I saw it. A room at the end of the hall, the door hanging open just enough for a sliver of light to creep through. I stepped inside, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The floor was covered in drawings. Dozens of them, scrawled across yellowed paper, stick figures of children holding hands, a tall figure standing behind them, its arms too long, its face an empty blur. And then my stomach dropped. In the center of the floor was a photograph. Dusty, faded, but still intact. I picked it up with shaking fingers. It was a picture of me. Not just me, Nathan, too. We were standing outside this very house, holding hands, smiling at the camera. But there was something horribly, impossibly wrong. There was a third child in the photo. And I had no idea who he was. The photograph trembled in my hands, the paper soft with age, its edges curling from years of neglect. My pulse pounded against my ribs as I stared at the image, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. 3 children. Me, Nathan, and someone else. A boy with dark, neatly combed hair stood slightly behind us, his expression almost shy, his small fingers barely visible where they gripped Nathan's wrist. There was something eerily familiar about him, something that tugged at the edges of my memory like a forgotten dream. My mind fought against it, but the recognition was there, just out of reach, like a word stuck on the tip of my tongue. I turned to Rachel, shoving the photo toward her with trembling hands. "Tell me you see him," I whispered, my voice barely stronger than the rustling wind outside. Rachel furrowed her brows, took the picture carefully, and squinted at it for a long moment before glancing back up at me. "Emily," she said, her voice slow and cautious, "there are only 2 people in this photo." A sharp chill raced down my spine, wrapping around my ribs like ice-cold fingers, squeezing the air from my lungs. My breath hitched painfully as I snatched the photograph back, my eyes darting frantically over the image, searching for what I already knew was there. He was still in the picture. The dark-haired boy remained, his solemn green eyes locked onto mine as if he knew I was looking at him, as if he had been waiting for me to remember. I swallowed hard, nausea curling in my stomach, bile rising in the back of my throat. Rachel didn't see him. Why didn't she see him? My fingers tightened around the fragile photograph, my nails digging into the thin paper as dread twisted its way through my bones. something was terribly, horribly wrong. My mind screamed for logic, for an explanation, but I couldn't find one that made sense. "Rachel, I swear to you, there are 3 people in this picture," I hissed, my voice shaking under the weight of something I didn't fully understand. "I see him. I know him." But Rachel only took a slow step back, her expression cautious, as if she wasn't sure if she should be more afraid of the picture or of me. Before she could respond, before I could try to force the words into something that made sense, a sound echoed down the long, decaying hallway, a low, deliberate creak, like the weight of a foot pressing down on rotted wood. Rachel and I both froze, our bodies going rigid, the air between us thickening into something dense and suffocating. My breath caught in my throat, my ears straining against the silence that followed, the heavy pause between each heartbeat stretching endlessly. The atmosphere had changed in an instant, as if something unseen had shifted in the shadows, as if the house itself was holding its breath along with us. The weight of an unseen presence pressed against my skin, sinking into my bones, sending every nerve in my body screaming for escape. Another slow, measured step echoed down the hall, closer this time, the boards beneath it groaning as if in protest. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, long and distorted, stretching unnaturally against the peeling wallpaper. Rachel's fingers clamped around my wrist, her grip iron tight, her breath sharp and uneven in my ear. "Emily," she whispered, barely more than a breath, "we need to go. Now." But before I could move, before I could force my feet to take a single step, something stepped into the doorway. My pulse slammed against my skull as my mind fought against what I was seeing, against the sheer impossibility of it. Nathan. Or at least, it looked like Nathan. He stood there, shoulders squared, his hands hanging loosely at his sides, his head tilted at the slightest angle, like a doll whose strings had been cut. His face was wrong. It was him, the same dark hair, the same sharp jawline, the same piercing green eyes. But the longer I stared, the less human he seemed. His eyes were too reflective, catching the dim light at an unnatural angle, gleaming like polished glass. His lips curled into something that might have been a smile, but it was stretched too wide, too forced, the muscles of his face pulling unnaturally, like he was mimicking a human expression rather than actually feeling it. My body locked up in cold terror, my thoughts a spiraling mess of fear and recognition and disbelief. Rachel let out a sharp gasp beside me, her fingers digging into my wrist so hard I thought she might break the skin. This wasn't Nathan. It wasn't my brother standing in that doorway. Then, in a voice that shattered everything, in a tone that was both his and not his, layered with something deeper, something wrong, he spoke. "You were never supposed to remember." The words crashed over me like ice water, a wave of clarity burning through my mind, setting every nerve in my body alight. The game we played. The night Nathan disappeared. The missing boy, Adam Whitmore. The memories I had buried for years, the pieces I wasn't meant to find again, all unraveled at once. My breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, the walls of the orphanage seeming to close in around me. My vision blurred, the air thick with something unseen, something alive. The shadows stretched unnaturally, reaching toward me like fingers curling around prey. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to remember. And as the thing that wore my brother's face took another step forward, smiling that too wide smile, I understood the truth in a single, suffocating moment. Nathan had never disappeared that night. I had. And whatever had come back in his place, it had been wearing his face ever since. The realization hit me with the force of a landslide, burying me beneath its weight, suffocating me with its sheer, inescapable horror. My entire life had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion built around a single, unshakable truth that I had somehow forgotten. I was the one who disappeared that night. Not Nathan. Not Adam Whitmore. Me. My stomach twisted violently, nausea rising in my throat as memories began to unfurl in my mind, their edges sharp and jagged, cutting through the carefully placed gaps in my past. I saw flashes of that night, the 3 of us running through the trees, our laughter ringing against the hollow silence of the orphanage, the feeling of something watching us from the dark. I remembered a game, one we had played before but never like this, never with the feeling that something unseen was moving the pieces for us. I saw myself standing in the doorway of that cursed house, my small hand raised to knock against the rotting wood. The rules of the game were simple. Knock once for yes. Knock twice for no. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as the last fragment of my past slid into place. I had knocked. Nathan's eyes, or rather, the thing that was wearing his eyes, gleamed in the dim light, his mouth curling at the edges, his too perfect smile stretching wider. You understand now, don't you? His voice was layered, multiple tones weaving together, something ancient hiding beneath the familiar cadence of my brother. He took another step forward, his movements smooth but unnaturally controlled, like he wasn't walking so much as gliding through the air. The orphanage around us seemed to pulse, the walls breathing, the air thick with a presence I could not see but could feel pressing in on me from every direction. Rachel was gripping my arms so tightly it hurt, her nails biting into my skin, but I barely noticed. My entire focus was locked onto the thing before me, the thing that was never my brother. I could feel something shifting beneath his skin, something writhing just beneath the surface, as if his very form was struggling to maintain its shape. You let me in, he continued, his voice a mockery of warmth, an imitation of the brother I had loved and lost. You opened the door. And when the game ended, you were the one who never came back. A sharp, painful clarity seared through me, setting every nerve in my body alight with terror. I had invited something into our world that night, something that did not belong, something that had been waiting in the dark for centuries. But it had not taken Nathan. It had taken me. Or rather, it had taken my place. My breath hitched in my throat as I forced my voice to work, my words coming out uneven and broken. If I never came back, then who am I? My own voice sounded foreign to me, as if I had never truly heard it before, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Nathan, the thing in his skin, let out a soft, amused hum, tilting his head as if considering me for the first time. You already know the answer, he murmured, his voice honey smooth, laced with something dark and knowing. You were never supposed to remember. But now that you have, it's time for you to go back. The shadows around us moved. They curled inward, twisting and shifting, reaching for me with unseen fingers, pulling at the edges of my existence like I was nothing more than a thread waiting to be unraveled. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and something deeper, something ancient and rotting. My body convulsed with the sheer wrongness of it all, every instinct screaming at me to run, to fight, to escape. But how could I fight something I could not see? How could I run from something that had already taken everything from me? Rachel yanked me backward with a desperate, shaking breath, her voice rising in raw terror. Emily, we have to get out of here. Now. But I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, trapped in a reality that was no longer my own. The thing wearing my brother's face smiled again, a slow, knowing grin, as if he was watching the final move of a game that had already been decided. You don't belong here, he whispered, and then, he stepped toward me. The world collapsed. The orphanage vanished. I was falling, tumbling through endless darkness, my screams swallowed by the void as the weight of reality itself shifted around me. My body twisted, folding inward, unraveling, dissolving. I felt my memories flicker, splintering like shards of broken glass, the pieces scattering into the abyss. I was being erased. I was being sent back to where I came from, to whatever place had held me captive for the past 20 years. And as I felt myself slipping further and further into the unknown, I heard Nathan's voice one last time, soft and distant, echoing through the void. Now do you remember what we are? The sensation of falling was unlike anything I had ever experienced before, a feeling not of weightlessness but of being pulled downward, dragged through something viscous and suffocating, like sinking through tar. The darkness around me was not empty, it was alive, shifting and writhing, pressing against my skin like unseen hands grasping at my limbs. My thoughts twisted and frayed at the edges, unraveling like loose threads from a forgotten tapestry. I had no sense of time, no way to tell if I had been tumbling through the abyss for seconds or centuries. Whispers curled around me, voices not my own murmuring in languages I did not understand, yet somehow recognized. These were not human voices. They belonged to something older, something vast and unknowable, something that had been waiting in this place long before I had arrived. And then, suddenly, the fall stopped. I landed with a force that rattled my bones, the impact sending a wave of cold through my entire body. My vision swam, my lungs aching as I gasped for breath, struggling to orient myself. The darkness peeled away, revealing a place that was both familiar and entirely wrong. I was standing in a vast, empty field, stretching endlessly in every direction, its surface flat and smooth, too perfect to be natural. The sky above was a deep, bruised purple, streaked with veins of black, as if the heavens themselves were wounded. There was no sun, no moon, no stars, just a dull, suffocating light that cast no shadows. And in the distance, far beyond the horizon, something moved. It was too large to comprehend, its shape shifting and unfixed, an impossible thing that had no right to exist. A deep, echoing sound filled the air, something between a whisper and a roar, vibrating through my bones like a forgotten language being spoken directly into my soul. I turned, my heart hammering, and there, standing just a few feet away, was Nathan. But it was not the Nathan I had known. This version of him was impossibly whole, untouched by time or decay. He looked exactly as he should have, exactly as he would have if he had never been taken, never been replaced. His green eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief, impossible moment, I saw something flicker behind them, recognition, fear, a desperate plea that was swallowed as quickly as it surfaced. My breath hitched as realization crashed over me. This was my real brother. This was the Nathan who had been lost. And if he was here, if he had been trapped in this place for all these years, then that meant, the thing wearing his face in my world had never been him at all. I staggered forward, my voice breaking as I tried to speak. Nathan, but before I could finish, the ground beneath me trembled, a deep, resonant sound shaking the very fabric of this place. A doorway appeared behind Nathan, forming from the air itself, its edges warping and twisting, as though reality itself was trying to push it away. It was the way back. It led home. My heart pounded with the realization. If I could reach it, if I could pull Nathan through with me, we could finally escape this nightmare. But as I moved toward him, he didn't move. His expression shifted, his lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no sound came out. His hands curled into fists at his sides, his entire body trembling, his face twisted with something like agony. He was afraid. And in that moment, I knew why. This place did not let things go. Something shifted behind him, rising from the endless field like a massive, twisting shadow, a shape with no form, a presence with no face. It loomed behind my brother, tendrils of darkness curling around him, sinking into his skin as though it had no intention of releasing him. His eyes flickered again, his mouth opened, and this time, words did escape. But they were not a plea for help. They were not words of hope. They were a warning, whispered in a voice that was barely his own. You have to choose. Nathan's words struck me like a physical blow, their meaning wrapping around my mind like a noose, tightening with every frantic beat of my heart. I had to choose. My breath came in sharp, panicked gasps as I took a step forward, reaching for him, reaching for the brother I had lost, the brother I had been forced to forget. But the shadow behind him, the thing that had held him captive in this place for 20 years, shifted and curled around his body like smoke made of hunger. It pulsed with something alive, something that was aware of me, something that knew I was trying to take back what had once been mine. Nathan's face twisted with pain as tendrils of darkness slithered across his skin, sinking into him, binding him to this place as though he had been swallowed whole by the very fabric of the void itself. I tried to move, tried to pull him toward me, but a force stronger than gravity held him in place, anchoring him to the endless expanse of nothingness that stretched out behind him. The doorway to the real world flickered behind me, its edges trembling as if struggling to maintain its fragile existence. It would not stay open forever. A part of me understood, deep in my bones, that this was not just any door. This was the only door. If I did not step through it soon, if I hesitated for even a moment too long, it would seal itself shut, leaving me stranded in this place between places, lost forever in a reality that had no name. My pulse thundered against my ribs as I looked at Nathan, truly looked at him, and in his eyes, I saw the truth he had been trying to tell me from the moment I arrived. He couldn't leave. The thing that had taken him, the thing that had stolen his life and replaced him with an imposter, would not allow it. It had latched onto him so completely, so deeply, that it had become part of him, had woven itself into his existence like an infection that could not be removed without destroying the host. If I tried to take him back, if I forced him through that doorway with me, it would not let go. It would follow. And if it followed, the real world would never be safe again. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had spent 20 years searching for something I was never supposed to find. I had uncovered a truth that had been buried for my own protection, had pulled at the edges of reality until the seams split apart. And now I was standing at the threshold of a choice that was no choice at all. If I stayed, would be lost, just as Nathan had been. If I tried to take him with me, I would unleash something into the world that was never meant to exist. There was only one way this could end. My chest heaved as I took a slow, trembling step backward, my gaze never leaving Nathan's. His eyes widened slightly, not in fear, not in sadness, but in understanding. He knew. He had known from the moment I arrived. He had known that this was always how it had to be. And yet, as I moved toward the doorway, his lips parted one last time, his voice a whisper that barely reached me over the howling wind of the void. "Don't forget me." I stepped through. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the doorway collapsed. The world around me folded inward, the vast, endless field vanishing in an instant, the sound of Nathan's voice swallowed by the howling void. A force slammed into my chest, a rush of air so strong it knocked the breath from my lungs, and then, silence. I gasped, choking on the sudden shift in reality, my fingers clawing against solid ground, my body trembling as I realized where I was. The orphanage was gone. The void was gone. The endless, shifting sky was gone. I was standing in my parents' backyard, the grass cool beneath my bare feet, the wind soft and familiar against my skin. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Except for one thing. Nathan was nowhere to be seen. The only trace of him, the only proof that any of it had been real, was the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my ears and the single whispering thought that had embedded itself into my mind, unshakable, immovable, undeniable. I was the only twin who had ever come home. Thank you for watching this story to the end. Subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with new stories. I also look forward to your comments, criticisms and suggestions below this video.